Okay, humans, it's time to talk about the animation menu, specifically the key sets. Um, so before we begin, we need to create an object, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and create a polycube. I've already reset its settings so that I don't have to look at this ugly topology that I showed you before. And I'm going to pop off the key menu. Okay, now the set key bit is fairly easy to remember. If you've watched the previous video, you'll know all about this. I basically go to a particular frame, I press S, or press the set key bit, and it's going to remember the state of this object. I'm going to move it to a particular location. Go to the frame first, and then I go to a particular location, press S, and I can obviously work on any different attribute that I like. I can rotate this in a strange fashion, and then I can scale it up and press S, and I can go further out to 25 and go back, for example, to 0. Let's say 0 this out, and this goes to 1 or 0 0.5. Oops, 0. Okay, fine. 0 0.5 has to be 0 0.5. For some strange unknown reason to me, the number pad did not work for it. Okay, so we've got all these frames, and now let's see what the story is. Oh, I didn't get it done to 25. That's amazing. That's just great. Okay, let's go back to 0 then. Back to 0. And now we're going to press here 0 point. Okay, this works now. Enter. Okay, set key. Oops. No. Ah, god damn it. Way to go. Where are you, boy? I zeroed this out. 0 0.5. Okay, now we're talking. Now I'm going to press S. And if we go through all this animation, we will see that it goes from 1, which should be 1, by the way. We should key this being as 1. Okay, and now set the key for this. By the way, notice that if I use the set key on animated, it will also update only the stuff that's being changed instead of replacing everything. So in other words, this will allow me to if I have set key on translate, let's say I move this over here. This is frame number 1. So let's say I start from over here, and I'm going to set the key on translate. Notice that my scale stays 1. So when I say set key on animate, it will basically set key on anything that has changed. So if I go ahead and move the translate a little bit and maybe rotate this a little bit as well, if I press set key on animated, this will change the ones that have been. This will basically animate the ones that have been changed. Well, it's sometimes it's useful because set driven key, set regular key, it basically it overrides everything. You might say, well, when the hell will I ever need to have something that is anything other than the recorded state of the object? Well, that's a fair question, but at the end of the day, it really depends on what you're doing. So I don't know. The fact that it's here means that somebody found it useful, and the fact that it's actually so close to the set key, I suspect it could be very useful. But then again, it doesn't have a shortcut, so maybe it's not useful. I don't know. I never had to use this really. Okay, so let's take a look at our animation. There's our cube. It goes left and right, and then goes right back down, and it is done. However, here's the thing. Notice that in this situation, obviously there are other ways to do this, but let's say you wanted to speed things up or speed things down, or just time it differently. Let's say this is the jump, right? And our jump goes for 25 frames per second. For 25 frames. Maybe this is too slow for us. We want to move this. We want to make sure that this part of the jump, okay, imagine that this is the jump. Maybe I should just look at it from the top, I believe. Where's my top view? Where's the top view? No, I don't want to say. So if I take a look at it from the top and I turn off the grid over here so that we can actually see what we're doing. If I take a look at it from the top, the object moves almost like it jumps. Okay, there we go, it jumps. Now we want to preserve this ratio over here, right? We want to preserve this ratio over here, but we want to move this point so that the character gets closer to our object. Okay, we want to move all of these. Now, one of the ways to do it would be to essentially shift and left mouse drag and move these things to the left or to the right, which is completely fine and will work and will basically serve our purpose. However, there's also another option. What we could do is we could define some breakpoints. Obviously, I'm skipping the set key on translate, rotate, and scale because you'd have to be a complete idiot not to figure out what they do. Okay, the breakdown key is fairly simple, but it's also quite interesting in what it does. If we go ahead and select this, oops, my bad. I'm sorry, I'm trying to select 2 frames at the same time on the time slide. It doesn't work. Basically, if we go ahead and transform, notice how, by the way, that if you right mouse button over here, you'll get the exact same settings as over here. It's actually one of the reasons we're not going to go through these. Possibly we'll go through the bake animation at the end after we're done with the animating our character. All right. So notice here as well that you've got all the playback looping, like once, oscillate, continues, the same stuff you see at the preferences here. Tangents, we're not going to go through this yet because we haven't gone through the editors that we use these things. But when we go to keys, you want to convert the key to breakdown. Obviously, another option is to set a breakdown key. But I'm going to convert this right now. Well, there's a bunch of new stuff. Display key text. Jesus, I didn't even know they added this before. These are the same options from the preferences, by the way. Anyway, I'm going to convert this key to a breakdown, and I'm going to convert this key to a breakdown. So what has this done? First of all, it changed the color of the keys, which was always nice. But basically what this means is that whatever we do to a particular frame, this will always maintain the ratio between these frames. So if I grab this frame, right? If I grab this frame over here and I move it, it will move with both of these breakdowns. It will basically, these breakdowns will respect the timing of the animation. And notice one more thing. Because we have, this one is obviously at the end, there's no keyframe over here to respect, but this one is caught in between keyframes. So the closer we get, notice that this one is basically behaving like a regular keyframe. It jumps from keyframe to keyframe, but this one sticks in the middle sometimes. This is because this one is trying to keep the same distance from here and still trying to respect some kind of a flow in from over this side. So if I go ahead and select this object now from start to finish, the movement will be sort of the same, but the timing will be a lot faster. Okay, this whole jump, jump is gonna start basically performing itself a lot sooner. So if this was a platformer, this is how I would fix a jump. If I decided, okay, maybe 25 frames is too fast or too slow, maybe I could just grab this and move it to wherever I want. Maybe frame 30. Maybe this is the way it has to be. Let's see what's the story then. So grab our object and go from frame 1. Now notice how much smoother this is, how much slower this is. This is because, again, we've got a much bigger difference. And notice that even though before I had a lot more frames, a lot less frames, as in, the difference between these two. I'm just going to go and select this one again just to show you. So this was at frame 15. Notice how between these two, even less, maybe 14 or whatever, there's only like 5 or 6 or 7 frames. But the further away we get, the bigger this distance becomes in terms of frames. That's because the timing, this thing respects the timing of our animation. So if I go ahead and play this, notice how much slower this bit is, like how much longer it goes into this animation, but it still respects the same ratio between these two points. So it is important just to keep in mind that such a thing exists. And once you're done editing, like nothing is there to stop you. I'm just going to go back here and I'm going to just go back to 30 because last time I've been changing this. This is an undefined project, so it doesn't remember all the preferences and all that. But once you let's say you're happy with your timing, you can always convert these things back into regular keys. So there we go. We've got regular key, convert to regular key, and this key is sort of like in between. It's not exactly on the frame, so this creates some issues if you decide to move it. But you know, obviously you could always convert it back to something, or you can delete it even. I'm not going to bother with this because I wanted to show you what the breakdown keys do. However, there's one other thing that we need to look over. I'm going to go over here. We're going to look over set driven key. The set driven key, this is a very cool little menu. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to press this set thing, right? Oh, Jesus, it's 5:30. Okay, so once we're done with this, I'm going to have to cut this short. To be honest, we're not gonna go through the blend shape just yet, because the blend shapes we have to work with deformers for that. I just want to show you how vertex animation works. So once we're done with the set driven key, I will conclude this video for now. So I'm gonna close this, put this over here, and since we're on the frame 1, let's see what we've got. We've got the driven bit. What is this? The called pCube1. Now, remember that whenever we tie something to the time slider, we're basically tying it to the time, okay? So as we're playing stuff, these frames are rolling. This value here changes from 1 to however many we got over here. And according to this value, according to this change, so do these channels over here change. So they're tied together. There's a relationship. However, there's also a way to tie two other channels. It's not like nobody says that you have to tie things to time. The reason people tie things to time is because time always moves forward, and you can't just stop it in the middle of an animation. Let's say you have someone throwing a ball, you can't just stop time and be like, yeah, man, well, you know, okay. So here's the same thing. Essentially, this is very useful when you have vertex animation, which we're going to talk about in the next video. But it is very nice to just understand how this thing operates. So I'm going to create this time a torus, because why the hell not? Although I need to create a torus with the basic settings, please. Thank you. Okay. Notice how we have a donut right now, which basically doesn't serve us any purpose. It's not part of an animation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tie this thing in order to control some aspects of my object over here. Now let's go over the frames again and notice what's happening. Nothing like out of the ordinary. We got all these values changing. So what I'm going to do, remember that we are changing our rotate. Look at the rotate over here, right? We're changing our rotation in a drastic way, like all of the 3 axes. So there's no way you can confuse that as some kind of a rotation. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to grab this object over here. I'm going to load as a driver. So like this is very simple to understand. Imagine that whatever value you see here is basically your time slider, okay? Whatever value you see here, this is your regular channel box. So if I grab this right now and I say, okay, I want the scale of the torus. No, this is going to be too lame. I want the translate of the torus on Y, on Z probably better, or Y. Okay, let's keep it a Y, to correspond to the rotate X, Y, and Z of all right, let's just say X and Y of our object. So we're gonna rob our object of X and Y. The rest is gonna be left to the time slider. So I'm gonna set key right now. So there's my set key done. Now what did this do? I mean, there's nothing physically that happened over here, so I have no idea. However, we've got a bunch of outputs like blend weights 2, blend weights 1. What does that mean? If we go ahead and select our object, you will quickly notice that there's a distinct difference in the rotation value over here. And now if we play the animation, what do you think is going to happen if we play the animation? If we go through, all these values are still changing, but that is only because we haven't set up the difference on the other side. So let's go ahead and select again our donut over here. I'm going to translate this on Y. And I'm going to grab my cube and I'm going to rotate this by, I don't know, 50. Okay, this rotated it by 50. and I'm going to set the key again. So this thing is keyed. It should be working now completely easy. Let's see what happens. Oh, there we go. Notice now that whenever I'm changing the values on my Y, that the corresponding value on the cube also changes. So let's see now. Well, actually, I should probably redo this. Redo. Let's see if it still works. Okay. So I'm going to zero this out again. I'm just going to zero this Y thing. And I'm going to close this out. I really don't need this right now. But obviously, you could definitely go a little bit deeper. Maybe I should just minimize this for the time being. Now notice what's going to happen if I play the animation. It still works, right? Even though we've taken out, over control over objects, rotation value here, this thing still works. So I could now go ahead and still rotate. I'll still apply the same difference over here to this object, and now if I continue, it will remain with this difference. Okay, so essentially the way you can think about this is it's much like keyframing. It's basically exactly the same as keyframing. The only difference is that whatever values you assign to your keyframe will be controlled only by this object. So in order for us to get this rotation, let's say, let me just be completely explicit here on how this works. I'm going to zero this out again. And I'm going to go to the last possible frame, which is this one. And we're basically going to animate past this point. So let's say we want this thing to have a particular position at frame 22. And I'm going to have this position over here. All right. Now, if I press S, what's going to happen? What do you think is going to happen if I press S? Think about it. Think about it. All right, that's enough thinking. So I'm pressing S. Notice that I could not overwrite the driven key. That's because the driven key has more. It basically is a higher level of modification. You can't just overwrite it. Now, imagine that at frame 21, I want this thing to turn on plane X and Y by 50. Obviously, like beyond the obvious, where I could just grab this and put it on 50 and make it work on my own. I just want you to imagine that this is not feasible, or even though it could be feasible, it's just too much of a pain in the ass. Usually, these driven keys are used for vertex animations and morph targets. And if you had a cluster of vertices, you wanted to deform something or anything really that basically has a lot of values, usually you tie that to a driven key so that you just grab this object, move it, and you get the desired effect. And the cool bit is you can animate this object. Okay, you could go to frame 21, right, and you can actually move it. Well, this is obviously you need a start point here, so I'm going to go into frame 1. This is going to stay in frame 1 the same way it is, but then at frame 21, it will move and rotate our object. Okay, that's the story over here. Now the thing is that our object is not going to move along the path, like from start to finish. That's because we keyed it in over here. So let's go ahead and see what's going to happen. Play this. There we go. This thing is rotating slowly but surely. It is rotating. So this doesn't really work for us. However, if we delete this keyframe, now we've got only this object here. So there's nothing to go over. All right, there's nothing to go over. So we need to use breakpoints and other such things in order to actually make it work the way we want. So let's say we want this to be moving within one frame. Okay, within one frame we want this to move. So I'm going to move this. Instead of frame 21, I'm going to delete this. And I'm going to say on frame 24, no, on frame 24, I want to set the key for this on frame 24. So I'm going to go to 0. And I'm going to go to frame 22. And I'm going to say set this bit. Or you could go a little bit further and just decide to, okay, we're going to set the we're gonna set the translate of this, or you could just use Shift W, Shift E, or Shift R depending on what you want. I'm just gonna use Shift W. So I'm gonna set the translate on this. I'm gonna move it to 2 frames, move it to the left, and then Shift R, Shift W. However, notice one other thing. Even though I overwent, I could go further and further and further away from this. But no matter how far away I go, this rotation is never gonna exceed 50. Okay, it will never exceed 50 because that's what I keyed it to. That's what I told it to do. And if I told Maya to do that, it's gonna do that. All right. So this is essentially your contract with this object here. Is that you basically this is the boss. This is much like a parent thing, the parenting constraint, only a little bit different, I suppose. Okay. So let's see what's going on then. Let's take a look at our object. Now we're gonna go through all of these keyframes over here. We go from 1 to 2 and then to 21, and we are all the way over here. Now this object does not have any more keyframes on it, so whatever happens to it cannot be animated by the time slider. But if I move it forward, since our driver is going to move and the driver is driving our main object, our driven object, this will still animate it. Okay, so essentially you're delegating your animation to an object in order to simplify a scene. Because imagine if I had 1,000 of cubes. Like, let's say I had thousands of cubes, and yes, conventionally, even if I had thousands of cubes, I could just grab all of them and change their value over here to match itself. But imagine if I had thousands of cubes and I wanted different rotation values on each one. Now, how does that sound? Like, you still have to go through each and every cube and set up the rotation that you wanted to, but you only have to do this once, okay? And you have to define a range. So if I had 1,000 cubes, okay, if I had 1,000 cubes, and 200 of these would go between 0 and 50, another 200 would go between 0 and 100, another 200 would go between 100 and 0, between 0 and 150, and so on and so forth. This would allow me to tie all of these rotations to one attribute. And this attribute could be my own custom made attribute. It could just be a variable. It could just be something that just moves on its own. It doesn't have to be a translator, rotator, or something. You can create attributes. I believe I've gone through this, did I? Or yeah, I think you can create attributes. You can add attributes over here, and you can edit attributes. So you can go along these lines and decide what you want to do as you progress. But what's important here is to understand that whatever value you have on your channel box, you can tie that to absolutely anything. It's much like a time slider here. So that is our driven keys being done, which is pretty cool. So I'm going to delete this now, and notice that even though I deleted the damn thing, the rotation still is bound. So I have lost my ability to animate now because there's nothing to drive this object. Whatever I just did basically destroyed it. So if I go ahead and delete the history now, delete all by type, delete all the history, even though I did that, I still don't have full control of my objects. Now what's going to happen if I now decide to like to set a particular keyframe? Let's say I wanted frame 24 to do this. I'm going to set it. I still cannot do this. You need to delete the actual function, which is in the time and graph editor. So we'll be talking about the graph editor and all that jazz later down the line. But usually you really don't want to be doing that. Or you could just delete the inputs. By the way, look at this. You can even key your inputs. You can break down all of your inputs. You can do a lot of stuff. So you definitely have a lot of flexibility when it comes to animating. And that's what Maya was made for originally anyway. It was an animation tool set. It wasn't a modeling thing. People used to model in 3ds Max before they modeled in Maya, I believe. Or Softimage or whatever, I don't know. It doesn't matter what people used to model in, but I think Maya was specifically made for animation initially. So yeah, anyway, that's the whole story here with this object. There's really nothing more to talk about. Maybe I could talk about the animation layers here and show you how to perform different settings, but like I feel like I've explained it well enough for you to like to just do it on your own. If you really wanted to see how this whole thing works, you could basically try and play around with these settings. It's just 3 buttons. They don't really do that much fancy things, and you can see how it operates if you really wanted to. But look, it's 6 o'clock in the morning, and I think it's time to kick the curb. So if you guys like need some question, if you guys got any questions on this, I recommend you first of all obviously check the internet. All right, don't bother asking me in the comments, because God knows when this is gonna happen, and I probably won't have time to answer. If I do, well, you'll be lucky. And even if I read it, I mean, I don't remember everything I've done ever in my life, you know. Anyway, point in case, you can animate everything you want with set driven key. You have loads of flexibility here, and it allows you to basically have full control of your scene. Okay, so yeah, that's it. I'll see you guys next time, and goodbye.